56 million people died. The Amazon grew over their cities, and the regrowth was so enormous that it changed the climate of the entire planet. That is not a metaphor. A 2019 study calculated that the post-contact die-off in the Americas caused the abandonment of 55.8 million hectares of cultivated land. The returning forest pulled 7.4 petagrams of carbon from the atmosphere. Global temperatures dropped. The Little Ice Age intensified. Then, for 5 centuries, the regrowing forest became the evidence used to argue that no one had ever lived there. The Amazon was pristine wilderness, the textbook said. No civilization, no agriculture, no cities. In 2023, 2 landmark studies shattered that claim. The soil itself was engineered. Over 10,000 structures are still hidden, and the people who built them left behind a technology that regenerates itself 1 centimeter per year after 7,000 years. This is the final episode of our Amazon trilogy. And to understand how a civilization was erased so completely that even scientists refuse to believe it existed, we need to start with a boy in the Netherlands who almost starved to death. In 1944, the Netherlands was starving. The German army had blocked food shipments to the western provinces, and the winter of 1944 to 1945, known as the Hunger Winter, killed more than 20,000 Dutch civilians. Families stripped tree bark for soup. They ate tulip bulbs and sugar beets salvaged from frozen fields. In the small town of Hailu, north of Amsterdam, a 10-year-old boy named Wim Sombroek watched his family survive on harvests from a tiny plot of land behind their house. The soil on that plot was different from the sandy earth around it. It was dark, rich, fertile in a way the surrounding ground was not. His family had been adding manure, sod, and organic waste to that patch for generations, following a medieval Dutch tradition called plagen agriculture. The soil had become something more than dirt. It had become a living system that kept feeding them even when everything else failed. Sombroek never forgot that. The boy who survived famine because of engineered soil grew up to become one of the most important soil scientists of the 20th century. He earned his degree at Wageningen University, joined a United Nations survey team in the Brazilian Amazon, and in 1963 published the first serious scientific study of something the locals had been telling outsiders about for centuries. Deep in the Amazon basin, scattered along rivers and hilltops, there were patches of black earth. The Brazilians called it Terra Preta do Indio, Indian dark earth. It was up to 2 meters deep, sometimes stretching across hundreds of hectares, and it was wildly, inexplicably fertile in a region where the natural soil is among the poorest on the planet. Amazon soil, the kind that covers most of the basin, is called oxysol. It is red, acidic, and almost useless for farming. The nutrients that exist in the rainforest are locked in the living biomass above the ground, not in the dirt below it. When you clear the forest, the soil gives you maybe 2 or 3 harvests before it collapses into something closer to powdered brick. This is why the Smithsonian's Betty Meggers, the most influential Amazonian archaeologist of the 20th century, declared in 1971 that the Amazon was a counterfeit paradise. Her argument was simple. Poor soil means no agriculture. No agriculture means no large populations. No large populations means no civilization. The Amazon, she insisted, could never have supported anything more complex than small nomadic bands drifting through the trees. But Sombroek had seen the black earth, and the black earth did not fit. Terra Preta contains up to 150 grams of carbon per kilogram of soil. The surrounding oxysol holds 20 to 30 grams. That is a 5 to 7 times enrichment. The phosphorus levels in some Terra Preta deposits reach 8,800 milligrams per kilogram, compared to 200 or 300 in adjacent soil. The pH sits around 5.5 to 6.5, a full unit less acidic than the surrounding ground. Nitrogen is 3 times higher. Calcium, potassium, and organic matter are all elevated far beyond what natural processes could explain. But the numbers alone do not capture the strangest part. When scientists began sequencing the DNA inside Terra Preta, they found a world that had no name. Up to 84% of microbial gene sequences recovered from the soil belong to organisms that have never been classified. Unknown bacteria, unknown archaea, an entire ecosystem of microbial dark matter thriving in a material created by human hands thousands of years ago. The dominant bacterial phylum in Terra Preta is Firmicutes, which makes up 37% of the microbial community. In the surrounding oxysol, Firmicutes barely registers at 2%. That is a 16-fold enrichment. The soil also harbors elevated populations of free-living nitrogen-fixing bacteria that do not require legume roots to operate, mycorrhizal fungi that extend root networks across entire forest patches, and at least one entomopathogenic fungus called Cordyceps confragosa. The black earth is not just fertile, it is biologically alien compared to everything around it. And here is the detail that troubled scientists for decades. When local farmers in the Amazon dig away the top 20 centimeters of Terra Preta to sell as potting soil, the earth grows back. They return 20 years later and harvest it again. The soil regenerates at approximately 1 centimeter per year. William Woods, a soil scientist at the University of Kansas, was among the first to document this phenomenon. Nothing in conventional soil science explained it. In September 2025, Bruno Glaser of Martin Luther University in Halle, Germany, published the closest thing to an answer. His paper in Carbon Management revealed that biochar particles inside Terra Preta develop mineral organic coatings on their surfaces over centuries. Iron oxide nanoparticles form on clay particles surrounding the charcoal, creating a kind of armor that protects the aromatic carbon core from degradation. The charcoal acts as a coral reef for microorganisms. Its surface area reaches up to 300 square meters per gram. Bacteria trade electrons through conductive microbial nanowires that the biochar's structure facilitates, and the whole system feeds itself through what Glaser called a negative priming effect, where the biochar organic matter combination actually slows decomposition of existing humus instead of accelerating it. The analogy that comes closest is a sourdough starter. You feed it, and it propagates itself into the fresh material indefinitely. Sombroek spent 40 years chasing the answer. He became director of the International Soil Reference and Information Center. He oversaw the first global map of human-caused soil degradation. He directed the Land and Water Development Division at the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome. And then, in 2001, he helped assemble a multinational research group called Terra Preta Nova, dedicated to one goal: figuring out how the ancients made this soil, and whether modern science could do it again. On December 19, 2003, Wim Sombroek died in Belém, Brazil, at the age of 69. He was working as a visiting researcher at the Museu Goeldi, still pursuing the project. He never saw the proof. The proof came 20 years after his death. In September 2023, a team led by Morgan Schmidt of the Federal University of Santa Catarina published a paper in Science Advances titled "Intentional Creation of Carbon-Rich Dark Earth Soils in the Amazon." The paper had an unusual author list. Alongside Schmidt, MIT geomorphologist Taylor Perrin, and University of Florida anthropologist Michael Heckenberger, there were 7 names most science journals have never printed: Yamalui Kuikuro, Kumesi Waura, Huke Kuikuro, Taku Wate Kuikuro, Takuma Kuikuro, Yahila Kuikuro, Afukaka Kuikuro. 7. Indigenous co-authors from the Kuikuro people of the Upper Xingu. What Schmidt's team discovered is that the Kuikuro do not just live on Terra Preta. They are still making it. Right now, using the same method their ancestors used thousands of years ago. The Kuikuro call the enriched soil egepe. They call the ash and charcoal mixture they spread on the ground ilubepe, which translates literally as what was ashes. They collect organic waste, burn it at low temperatures to produce charcoal, mix it with food scraps, fish bones, and pottery fragments, and work it into the soil in a radial pattern spreading outward from the center of their villages. The team found that residential soils had more than double the organic carbon of the surrounding forest floor. Phosphorus, potassium, and calcium were more than 10 times higher. At the ancient site called Seku, the deposits held an estimated 4,500 tons of stored carbon. At the modern Kuikuro II village, which has only existed for a few decades, the soil had already accumulated 110 tons. The radiocarbon dates ranged from 5,000 years at the oldest deposits down to 300 years at the most recent. This was not an accident of habitation. This was agriculture. This was engineering. And it had been running, continuously, for millennia. Sombroek's dream was confirmed. The boy from Hailu was right, but the implications went far beyond soil science. If you want to understand why this matters, think about what it means in reverse. Every patch of Terra Preta in the Amazon marks a place where people lived, where they farmed, where they built. The darker the soil, the longer they stayed. And there is a lot of dark soil. Conservative estimates place the total area of confirmed Terra Preta at 6,000 to 18,900 square kilometers. That is the documented minimum. But William Woods estimated the real figure could be as high as 10% of low forested Amazonia, which works out to roughly 630,000 square kilometers. An area the size of France. In July 2024, a team led by Goldberg published in Nature Sustainability that satellite-based machine learning found dark Earth spread across 3 to 4% of the 26,000 square kilometer Xingu indigenous territory alone, containing an estimated 9 megatons of sequestered carbon. These patches extend well beyond previously known archaeological sites. The soil is showing up in places nobody expected. And this is exactly what the LiDAR data predicted. In October 2023, 1 month after the Schmidt paper, another study landed in Science. This one involved 230 researchers from 156 institutions across 24 countries. Lead author Vinicius Peripato of Brazil's National Institute for Space Research had taken publicly available LiDAR data, originally collected by the Brazilian government to estimate rainforest biomass, and repurposed it for archaeology. His team scanned 5,315 square kilometers. That is 0.08% of the Amazon basin. Peripato himself described it as basically a shot in the dark. They found 24 previously unreported earthworks, fortified villages, defensive geoglyphs, crowned mountains, megalithic structures, floodplain sites, scattered across Mato Grosso, Acre, Amapa, Amazonas, and Para. Then they built a predictive model, not machine learning, but a Bayesian statistical framework using soil chemistry, terrain position, drainage proximity, temperature, and precipitation as variables. The model predicted earthwork probability for every square kilometer of the Amazon basin. The result: between 10,272 and 23,648 pre-columbian earthworks are still hidden beneath the canopy. With roughly 961 previously documented, that means approximately 94% of what is down there has never been seen by modern eyes. The study also identified something that connects directly to Terra Preta: 53 domesticated tree species, including Brazil nut, cacao, rubber, and bread nut, showed statistically significant association with earthwork probability. In other words, the forest canopy itself carries the fingerprint of the civilization below. A 2015 synthesis paper in Proceedings of the Royal Society confirmed that at least 83 native Amazonian plant species contain domesticated populations. The Brazil nut tree that towers 60 meters above the jungle floor was not put there by nature. It was planted, tended, and selected by people who also engineered the soil it grows in. The pristine wilderness that environmental campaigns have spent decades trying to save is, in the most literal sense, a garden that went feral 500 years ago after its gardeners died. If you have been watching this series from the beginning, you already know some of what LiDAR has found. 6,000 platforms in Ecuador, pyramids 22 meters tall in Bolivia, 957 kilometers of causeways in the Llanos de Mojos. But those discoveries came from tiny survey windows. The Peripato prediction says we have barely scratched the surface. Like and subscribe if you want to see what comes next, because the next part of this story is where it gets personal. To understand how the Amazon's real history stayed hidden for so long, you need to go back nearly 500 years. In 1542, a Spanish conquistador named Francisco de Orellana became the first European to navigate the full length of the Amazon River. His chronicler, Friar Gaspar de Carvajal, described vast populations stretching along the riverbanks for hundreds of kilometers. Towns that took hours to pass, fortified settlements with roads leading into the interior, warriors by the thousands. Carvajal wrote that there was one settlement that stretched for 15 miles without any space from house to house, which was a marvelous thing to behold. For 450 years, historians dismissed these accounts as fantasy, the ravings of desperate men lost in the jungle, exaggerating to justify their expedition. The Amazon was empty. Everyone knew that. Everyone was wrong. Every major claim Carvajal made has now been confirmed by LiDAR, Terra Preta mapping, or archaeological excavation. But the woman who cemented the myth of the empty Amazon was not a conquistador. She was a scientist. Betty Meggers worked at the Smithsonian Institution for over 40 years. Her 1971 book, Amazonia, Man and Culture in a Counterfeit Paradise, became the definitive text on Amazonian ecology. Her argument that the rainforest's poor soils made complex civilization impossible was not just influential. It was orthodoxy. For decades, if you wanted funding for Amazonian archaeology, you did not challenge Betty Meggers. She worked 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, in her Smithsonian office. She proposed that the elaborate polychrome ceramics found on Marajo Island at the Amazon's mouth were brought by Japanese Jomon culture settlers crossing the Pacific, not developed locally. She dismissed every claim of large populations. She never conceded. And she had one relentless critic. Anna Roosevelt is the great-granddaughter of President Theodore Roosevelt. In the 1980s, she re-excavated Marajo Island, Meggers' own signature site, using ground-penetrating radar and remote sensing techniques that did not exist in the 1940s when Meggers did her original fieldwork. Roosevelt found evidence of populations exceeding 10,000 people at a single site. Then she went deeper. In 1996, Roosevelt published in Science her findings from Caverna de Pedra Pintada, a cave near Monte Alegre in Para. 56 radiocarbon dates placed human habitation from 11,200 to 10,000 years ago, contemporary with Clovis culture in North America. Inside the cave, she found ghostly handprints of adults and children in red and yellow pigment, among the oldest art in the Western Hemisphere. People had been living in the Amazon for over 11,000 years, in an environment that Meggers said could not support them. The feud between Meggers and Roosevelt became, in the words of one academic observer, bitter and personal. It featured charges of colonialism, elitism, and membership in the CIA. Meggers scoffed that Roosevelt seemed to think being a president's granddaughter made her research unassailable. Roosevelt fired back with data, but it was not Roosevelt who delivered the final blow to the counterfeit paradise theory. It was a man living in a thatched hut in the Xingu. Michael Heckenberger arrived among the Kuikuro people in December 1992 at 1 a.m. on a moonlit night, after 15 hours in a fiberglass motorboat. He has returned almost every year since. What he found was not a nomadic tribe scraping by in poor soil. He found the remains of a planned urban network, roads up to 50 meters wide, the size of a 4-lane highway, connecting towns every 3 to 5 kilometers along a grid oriented to the summer solstice. Central plazas, 150 meters across. Defensive ditches, more than 2 kilometers long. Fish farms, dams, canoe canals, managed forests. The chief's house exceeded 1,000 square meters. Heckenberger told journalists in 2023 that the road network in the Xingu is a better pre-industrial analog for downtown Manhattan than classical Greece. His reasoning was specific. Athens may have had remarkable architecture and sculptures, but once you left the police, you found yourself on a goat path leading to who knows where. In the upper Xingu, it was impossible to get lost. His 2003 paper in Science documented 19 villages and included 2 Kuikuro co-authors. His 2008 paper in Science formally described what he called galactic urbanism, multicentric networked settlements that once supported 50,000 to 100,000 people across 20,000 square kilometers. By the 1950s, European disease had reduced the Xinguanos to 500, and the soil under every one of those settlements, Terra Preta. Meanwhile, 1,500 kilometers to the west, something equally strange was appearing from the air. In 1999, a geographer named Alceo Ranzi was flying to Rio Branco in the state of Acre when he looked out the airplane window and saw geometric shapes carved into recently cleared forest below. Perfect circles, perfect squares, ditches up to 11 meters wide and 4 meters deep, spanning from 100 to 300 meters across. He later said it could be something as important as an unknown Roman Empire or a Mesopotamia. It was completely covered by the forest for 6 to 10 centuries and is now reappearing. Over 450 geoglyph sites have now been mapped across 13,000 square kilometers of Acre. Some sites contain 6 enclosures stacked together. The BR-317 highway cuts through at least 11 of them. Radiocarbon dates place construction between roughly 2,500 and 1,000 years ago, though evidence of human landscape modification in the region extends back 10,000 years. That last number comes from Martti Parsinen of the University of Helsinki, whose 2020 paper in Antiquity used carbon-13 isotope analysis to trace continuous human activity in Acre to depths of time nobody expected. And Acre is not alone. Similar dark earths have now been documented on 4 continents. In Liberia and Sierra Leone, women are the primary creators of African dark earths containing 3 times the carbon of surrounding soils, maintained for at least 700 years, using principles nearly identical to Amazonian Terra Preta. Similar enriched soils appear in Borneo, Iran, the Scottish Hebrides, and across Europe from post-Roman London to 10th century Slavic settlements in northern Germany. As Cornell researcher Dawit Solomon observed, what is most surprising is that in both Africa and Amazonia, these 2 isolated cases of indigenous soil building developed independently. The technology was not unique to the Amazon. It was a human solution to poor soil that multiple civilizations invented separately. In 2017, Jennifer Watling published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences a study that fundamentally changed how we understand these structures. Using phytolith analysis and stable carbon isotopes from soil cores, Watling proved that the geoglyph builders did not clear the forest to build. They created small, temporary openings in managed bamboo forest and concentrated economically valuable species around the sites. Brazil, nuts, rubber trees, palms. She called it a prehistoric supermarket. Her conclusion was direct. Despite the huge number and density of geoglyph sites, we can be certain that acres forests were never cleared as extensively or for as long as they have been in recent years. Read that again. The ancient civilization that built over 450 monumental earthworks across an area the size of Connecticut did less damage to the forest than modern cattle ranching has done in 3 decades. And this brings us to the part of the story that nobody wants to hear. The Peripato study found something that makes the discovery itself a tragedy. The highest density of known earthworks lies outside protected areas, in regions with the highest deforestation rates. The very process that reveals them, clearing the forest, also destroys them. Eduardo Goes Neves, professor of archaeology at the University of São Paulo and one of the most experienced Amazon fieldworkers alive, put it in terms nobody can misunderstand. We are seeing 12,000 years of landscaping being destroyed by 30 years of deforestation to raise cattle and grow soy. Official Brazilian data shows deforestation rates dropping sharply under current policy, from 12,700 square kilometers in 2022 down to roughly 5,800 in 2025. But forest degradation, mostly from fire, surged 163% during the same period. In 2024, Brazil lost 2.78 million hectares of primary forest, the highest since 2019, and those fires do not count in the official deforestation statistics. At least 9 of the most significant geoglyph sites in Acre have been plowed over by soy, corn, and sugar farmers. Near Manaus, pre-colonial artifacts were shattered by mining company tractors in June 2019. Around Monte Alegre, 11,000 hectares were lost to soy in 2024 alone, threatening a state park that protects 600 prehistoric rock paintings dating back 11,000 years. And this is where everything we told you at the beginning comes full circle. Remember the number: 56 million dead, 55.8 million hectares abandoned, 7.4 petagrams of carbon pulled from the sky. Alexander Koch published that calculation in Quaternary Science Reviews in 2019. His team at University College London had quantified, for the first time, the atmospheric consequences of the largest population collapse in recorded history. The people who engineered Terra Preta, who built the roads in the Xingu and the geoglyphs in Acre and the pyramids in Bolivia, were erased so thoroughly that their own forest grew over their graves and convinced the world that nobody had ever been there. A genocide did not just kill a civilization, it cooled the planet. And then it rewrote history so completely that it took 5 centuries and airborne lasers to undo the lie. William Denevan, the geographer who coined the phrase the pristine myth in his landmark 1992 paper, calculated that 53.9 million people lived in the Americas before 1492. By 1650, 89% of them were dead. The human presence, Denevan wrote, was less visible in 1750 than it was in 1492. Not because the civilizations never existed, because the survivors were too few to maintain them. Today, the biochar industry has turned Terra Preta's ancient chemistry into a $600 million global market. Johannes Lehmann at Cornell University, a member of the National Academy of Sciences with over 400 published papers, estimates that replacing slash-and-burn agriculture with slash-and-char methods could offset up to 12% of human carbon emissions. Google purchased 100,000 tons of biochar carbon credits from Indian startup Varaha in January 2025, one of the largest corporate biochar purchases ever recorded. Patents exist in Germany and the United States for synthetic Terra Preta formulations. One German patent specifies the exact recipe: 50% biochar, 17.5% garden soil, 10% lava rock, 10% compost, 5% animal bones, 5% mussel shells, 2% bog sludge, 0.5% saltpeter. The global biochar market grew at a 91% annual production rate from 2021 to 2023. And in 2023, biochar represented over 90% of all delivered carbon removal credits worldwide. Even the United States military has taken notice, though not for farming. A 2026 study found biochar more than 99% effective at preventing PFAS, the forever chemicals, from leaching into groundwater at Air Force bases. Other researchers are exploring biochar for nuclear waste management, radiation shielding, and military-grade energy storage. But nobody has asked the Kuikuro for permission. Nobody has offered them a share of the profits from the knowledge their ancestors created. The 7 indigenous co-authors on that 2023 Science Advances paper are not receiving royalties from biochar startups, and the forest keeps burning. We started this trilogy with a question: were there really cities beneath the Amazon? The answer, now confirmed by LiDAR surveys in Ecuador, Bolivia, and Brazil, by predictive models covering the entire basin, by satellite mapping of dark Earth, by 7,000 years of radiocarbon dates, and by living indigenous people who still practice the same soil engineering their ancestors invented, is not just yes. The answer is that the Amazon was never wilderness. It was a garden, a managed landscape shaped by millions of people over thousands of years, connected by roads wider than highways, fed by soil they deliberately engineered, and organized into urban networks that rivaled anything in the pre-Columbian Andes. We found 6% of it. 94% is still buried. And every year, the bulldozers get closer. The full story of what lies beneath the Amazon is still being written. But the chapters that survive will depend on whether we protect the forest long enough for science to read them. Sombroek survived the hunger winter because his ancestors took care of their soil. The Kuikuro are still taking care of theirs. The question is whether the rest of us will take care of what remains of the largest archaeological landscape ever discovered, or whether we will let it disappear under soy fields and cattle pastures before we even learn what it was trying to tell us. If this trilogy changed how you think about the Amazon, share it with someone who still believes the rainforest was always empty. Because the greatest archaeological discovery of our century is happening right now, under the canopy, and most of the world has not heard a word about it.